Well, it's been a quiet couple of weeks in our cities, but today many people will be heading back to work, and that means public transport systems will be under pressure yet again, with some of them at breaking point.
But whose responsibility is it to make sure you get to work on time? As is often the case with politics, a funding blame game has erupted between federal and state governments. And for more, we're joined by Tony Morton from the Public Transport Users Association. Good morning, Tony. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, James. Good morning, Taj.
From your perspective, what do commuters across the country say they want from their public transport, and what do you think they deserve that they're lacking?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a disconnect between what Australians actually say they want prioritised and what our governments are actually doing. Public transport in Australia needs a lot of planning and it needs a lot of funding. Now, we're seeing in some places we are making progress on the planning side, but on the funding side, we still have the situation where the funding for new road projects is far greater than the funding for new public transport projects, which is the opposite of what Australians, when they're surveyed, actually say want to happen.
You talked there before, Tony, about a disconnect. It seems now that the Abbott government is coming out saying that public transport is a state government's responsibility. It seems there is the blame game and the losers are commuters.
Well, that's right. And the way our federal system works in Australia is that most of the revenue goes to the federal government, but most of the spending comes out of state governments. So what that means is that the state government's own revenue is just barely enough to keep our health and education and transport systems ticking over. So if you look at any major transport project that's happened in the last 2 decades, virtually every single one of them has been at least part federally funded. So this does seem to be a strategy, unfortunately, to try and ensure that we're actually more car dependent in 2030 than we are now, and to starve the country of the resources it needs, the financial resources to actually develop new major public transport infrastructure in the future.
Tony, this isn't just about people getting to work quicker, is it? It goes a lot deeper than that, doesn't it?
No, well, what good public transport does is it means people can go places without having to deal with traffic congestion, without having to deal with road rage or potentially becoming a car crash victim. It means that traffic congestion, of course, is a hard problem. It's not one that any city has managed to solve by building new roads, but if you give people an alternative, what it means is that we can add fewer cars to the roads so that people who really do need to go places by car or need to carry freight by truck actually have more room to do so. It makes sense. It's a win-win situation to improve public transport and to actually give priority to that. But that's unfortunately not what we're seeing from governments at the moment.
Tony, do you think a lack of planning could be part of this problem? It seems right across the country, apartment developments are put through. There's a massive population explosion in a certain suburb, yet there's no public transport in that area. There seems to be no forward planning.
Well, that's it. We have to make sure that our land use, our housing and shopping and all our commercial industrial developments happen in tandem with proper transport planning. We've seen all kinds of mistakes here and in North America and in other parts of the world where major developments have gone ahead without much thought being given to transport services and especially public transport services, and these turn out to be disasters. We've seen a situation, for example, with East Portland in the US. They did high-density residential development there, thinking that a 20-minute bus service would be enough to serve all those people, and 5 years later we're just seeing that it's a complete disaster from a livability point of view and from the point of view of people just trying to get around day to day, trying to get to school or get to the shops without much in the way of public transport to help them do it.
Tony, very, very quickly before we go, what can we see from our governments that would stop us from having the same chat in a year's time or in 2 years' time?
Well, our governments need to give some serious thought to what kind of cities we want in the 21st century, what kind of planning and transport solutions are going to allow people to go about their lives without a lot of undue stress, and to actually listen to what people are saying about what they want done on transport, rather than just roll out these 1950s approaches again and again that don't solve the problem and just give us more and more of a traffic problem in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks for your time. Tony Morton there from the Australian Public Transport Users Association.